Tiffany Calderara is a director of student evaluations and outreach at Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida. She provides guidance to students and families to help them navigate educational choices and fosters open discussions related to a student's sense of self and experience with having a learning disability while pursuing academic goals. Lynn Mabin Flagg is a licensed clinical social worker for Baltimore County Public Schools in Maryland and a clinician for the Maryland Department of Mental Health and Hygiene. Dr. Eric Hollander is a psychiatrist at Montefiore Health System in the Bronx, New York, and director of the Autism and Obsessive Compulsive Spectrum Program at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, also in the Bronx, New York. So we're going to start the conversation with Dr. Hollander. Doctor, exactly what is emotional self-regulation?
Well, emotional self-regulation is the ability to modulate one's emotions and to deal with a changing environment. So to be aware of what's triggering intense emotions and then to be able to effectively manage those emotions.
Great. So what does a person who has a strong control of their emotion, what does that look like?
Well, they can deal with all kinds of different challenges without having a meltdown, for example. So they can push themselves to advocate for themselves. They can transition from one activity to another. They can take on things that normally would make them uncomfortable, and then they can deal with the strong emotions that may be associated with all those triggers.
All right, thank you, Doctor. Lynn, conversely, what is dysregulation and what does that look like in neurodivergent children?
Dysregulation of emotions looks like the impairment of one's ability to regulate his or her mood, behavior in a setting, and there could be varying situations that occur, but this student perhaps doesn't really know how to figure out how to self-calm or approach the task without kind of having a meltdown or some kind of behavior that looks as if the child is really struggling with a challenge.
All right, thank you. Tiffany, so from what I understand, in neurodivergent children, many of them do struggle with emotional self-regulation. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that impacts various aspects of their lives?
Yeah, so in the experience, a child with neurodivergence, so like ADHD or autism, have challenges around being able to focus and attend and make sense of a whole lot of different stimuli in a learning environment from from the sensory side. And so emotions are a part of that sensory experience. And so different areas that would be impacted, basically every area of development would be impacted by that emotional experience where you're internalizing difficult, big emotions or externalizing. If you're having those behaviors that could look really out of control, it could be isolating you socially where your friends and your peers don't want to spend time with you, or it could be conversely where you're scared to make friends because you feel like you won't belong or they won't like you. It can make it difficult to be available for learning. And so for that cognitive and language development side, if you're overcome with emotion, at that point, you're just not going to be able to attend.
All right, thank you. So Dr. Hollander, is emotional self-regulation kind of a fixed concept, or does it evolve over time as the child develops?
Well, definitely it evolves over the time as kids get older. You know, as we become more mature, we're better able to manage our emotions. As the brain matures and the cortex develops and the pathways myelinate, then the cortex can control these limbic type of explosive behaviors. So people who become more responsible can then better regulate their emotions. The brain develops to be able to use top-down control to manage our emotions.
All right, thank you. So Lynn, as parents raising neurodivergent children, there are going to be situations that prove frustrating to mom and dad, things that they cannot control. But when it comes to helping to model for these children, how important is it for mom and dad to maintain their cool, so to speak, when it comes to confronting these issues with their children?
So I think as it relates to our ability as parents to model the behavior that we wish to see is a very important consideration when managing neurodivergent children. We know that if we can access those capabilities that are allowing kids to learn the skills, perhaps they can model the skills that they see. So being able to access what we call our upstairs brain in those moments when it's really tough is really what we want to teach kids and be able to role model ourselves for them.
All right. Tiffany, autistic and other neurodivergent children experience a range of emotions, but oftentimes they aren't able to identify or to understand what they're going through. So can you give us some idea how parents should go about helping them to make these identifications and to be able to better respond to when others are experiencing emotions, such as parents who are angry that the child didn't clean their room today? How do you help parents help their children?
So it's, I think, important to normalize that we all have emotional experiences, and sometimes we can ourselves feel out of control. And so even as parents, while we try our best to maintain our cool and calm and that upstairs brain, I like that phrase, we sometimes might have to model the moments when we're having a hard time too. And so that would be labeling a parent's own self-awareness around, I'm really frustrated, for example, and saying, mommy needs to take a little time out and mommy needs to do some deep breathing. And so modeling the actual coping skill alongside labeling the emotion is a really great strategy for parents to role model. And then for their assistance with helping children understand their own emotions, it starts really early, even with babies, where you can label very simple emotions like happy, mad, and sad. And then as children grow and develop more sophisticated emotional responses like embarrassment and nervousness, even labeling the words alongside those emotional experiences for our children really helps them recognize that they're, first of all, normalizing the experience, but also have words to express and then help go forward with coping and managing the emotion.
Thank you. Dr. Hollander, why is inflexible thinking a challenge to emotional regulation in teenagers?
Well, a breakthrough in our understanding of emotion regulation is that it really is intimately tied into this concept of inflexible thinking. So if people are very sensitive to unexpected changes in the environment, so behavioral inflexibility, or if they're stuck thinking certain kinds of things in an obsessive fashion over and over again, or black and white thinking, then that can cause strong emotions. And then individuals can protest as a result of the discomfort that they're experiencing when the world doesn't go according to their rules. So that discomfort can lead to protest, and that protest can lead to emotion regulation difficulties. Understanding that often the emotion regulation or protest is tied in really to the inflexible thinking can help you to understand what the triggers are, and also can open up a whole new approach to managing strong emotions by understanding that it's inflexible thinking that's driving the protest.
All right, thank you. So, Lynn, what are some strategies parents can employ during times when kids are in a state of dysregulation to try to de-escalate the situation?
So I think, again, being able to, as my colleague here said, being able to name it, to tame it is a good strategy. Allowing a kid to connect with the emotions that he or she is feeling is a very great strategy. I think sometimes if we can locate and identify a consistent place in our spaces around us that a child could identify as a safe space, and again, that's something that we can role model for children, that we also use and that we also go to when we're having emotional dysregulation, is a great way to teach that strategy. And I think also allowing kids to learn strategies for things such as breathing, Breathing is one of those skills that we can easily access. So it might be that thing that we can reach in our most difficult moments.
All right, thank you. So, Tiffany, how important are rewarding reinforcers for children who actually practice these strategies that parents give them?
It's really important to ultimately build those pathways, build that adaptive behavior. So if we're working on a skill, if we get immediate feedback in terms of you're on the right track, you're doing the right skill, it helps us feel more in control of our emotions and where we're headed and how we're learning. Examples of different kinds of reinforcers for children, it could be really related to their own preferences. Some children really love praise. So praising the, realization that, you just exercise your deep breathing skill we've been working on. Great job. For some children, they're more externally motivated. So they want maybe some kind of time on the computer or something that they really enjoy doing. And so for children, I've done things like used a star chart where you've earned 5 stars over noticing these behaviors and doing an excellent job. So now you earned your 10 minutes on the computer. So kind of structuring and providing some level of control in the process of learning in a safe way.
All right. Dr. Hollander, obviously mom and dad aren't always going to be around when a child has a meltdown. Maybe it happens in the middle of a class at school. Are there some strategies that moms and dads can teach their kids to cope during these times when they're not around?
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the challenges when people are having a meltdown is either they're dwelling on things that happened in the past, so a situation that wasn't fair, for example, or where something occurred that was unexpected and associated with discomfort, or they're preoccupied with some kind of catastrophe that can happen in the future. So one of the simple ways is to try to get individuals to be in the present, not in the past or in the future. And some of the techniques that have been discussed, so being present, focusing on breathing, doing counting can be very helpful. Rather than fighting with the individual to get them to stop having a meltdown, it's much more effective to get them to transition to another meaningful activity. So if there's something, a hobby, for example, a coloring book, breathing or counting, even watching a video may be a good way to get somebody to transition out of an emotionally charged state and be more present and centered in the present.
All right, thank you. So, Lynn, we've talked a lot about strategies for dealing with dysregulation, but I'm wondering whether implementing these strategies means that parents should ditch negative consequences for the kid who's having a meltdown.
Interesting question there. So I really think when we think about consequence, we should, as parents, consider that, consequence only work when children take responsibility for the actions that they've engaged in. So that approach, when you think about the outcome, might not match what needs to take place in that moment. So considering the connection that can motivate children towards change, I think is a mindset shift. So when we think about consequence, I think that there needs to be some focus, a higher degree of focus on changing behavior. So if we can connect those things, I think that's the higher degree of what we're attempting to gain out of the situation. So I think it's really a mindset shift for parents to think about changing behavior, not necessarily consequence.
All right, thank you. So, Tiffany, you currently are working with college level students, and I'm wondering whether these issues we've discussed follow these kids to college as well.
That's a good question. It does. I mean, it looks different. So students in college, I mean, it's a huge adjustment from the safety and comfort of home, and parents often help students manage stress and regulate their emotions. So being away from parents can be a challenge. So with that, students, they have coursework, they have all these changes, they have, free time they're managing, a lot of independence, and that can lead to some pretty strong feelings and feelings of inadequacy, things like that. If you're struggling with coursework, maybe not reaching out for help. So I recommend to college students to be, it's the exciting time of life where you're really developing your identity, yourself, and how you fit in the world. So being more aware of what you need to make sure that you're reaching your potential. So that's self-care oriented, like drinking enough water, getting enough sleep, those base things, eating enough food. But then the mental and social emotional self-care of making friendships. Here at Beacon, we have a large counseling and wellness center. So students have the access to work one-on-one with a licensed mental health clinician. And that really can help with that kind of reflective practice for sense of self and realizing more about how you can meet your own needs. And it's an exciting time.
All right. Well, I wanted to close our conversation with kind of a lightning round with one question for each of you, which is the same question. Do you have any closing thoughts for parents on this journey, how to help to improve their children's ability to deal with their emotions so that they, like their neurotypical peers, can have successful school careers and social lives? And I'll start with Dr. Hollander on that question.
Okay. Well, I think that young people can learn to advocate for themselves. They can learn to express their needs and use their language. They can be better at identifying the emotions that they're experiencing and sharing those emotions with others. And then they can also understand better the source of the frustration or the anger or rage or sadness that's triggering these things. Again, my sense is that difficulty dealing with a changing environment, difficulty dealing with unexpected developments in the environment, managing sort of repetitive kind of thinking and brooding, obsessive brooding, and then being able to stay in the present. All of those things can be really helpful for allowing neurodivergent individuals to live their life to the fullest, to engage in more meaningful social interactions, and to take advantage of all the opportunities that come their way.
All right. Tiffany, your thoughts?
So I think it's important as families to celebrate the time together and those milestones that are met, the growth. I see so many students with the ADHD, with autism, with the neuroatypicalities coming to Beacon and really doing amazing on their own, especially regarding advocating for their own needs. There's a lot of resiliency within our student population. And I think it's also really important to focus on work-life balance too. So a lot of parents feel like it's important to push their children into a lot of different activities. And in some ways, some children, it's very appropriate, but it's also nice to think about how to manage leisure time and relaxation time too. So I think when I'm looking at our college students coming in, sometimes it's difficult for them to know how to do that.
Okay. And Lynn, you have the last word.
Okay, so I'd say that there is no such thing as a bad emotion. I think that when we discover that we have emotions that challenge us, finding a way to lean into those things so that we can grow, and finding that trusted adult. I find that those relationships where kids connect to one person that's significant, that can mentor, that can listen, that can teach, can be the thing that helps a child get over some of those things that are being a barrier to their ability to manage their emotions. So leaning into those things and not running away helps us build our emotional skin.
All right. We'll have to end our conversation today right there. Tiffany Calderara, Lynn Mabin Flagg, and Dr. Eric Hollander. Thanks for the knowledge.